Welcome to the Executive Connect podcast. Today, I'm excited to speak with Damon Wells, a career Army officer with 28 years of service. Thank you so much for your service, Damon, and I'm excited to talk to you today about some of my favorite topics: leadership, team building, and strategies for success. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Those sound like great topics.
I want to jump right into talking a little bit about your background, including your time as a commander and working in high stakes environments. Can you share a little bit with our listeners?
Yeah, so I can go through just quickly through my background. Joined in 1995, which really sounds like ages ago, which puts me almost at 30 years, which, as you know, is mandatory retirement, which I'm actually looking forward to. Right now, I am in Stuttgart, Germany. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff at Africa Command, the joint U.S. command that oversees the continent of Africa. Before that, I was brigade commander at Fort Carson, Colorado, which is a beautiful post. I've been from Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to what's now Fort Cavazos, which used to be called Fort Hood in Texas. Been on the East Coast, been to the West Coast, been to Iraq a couple times, been to Afghanistan, some time in Korea, the Baltics, and now Germany. So over the course of 30 years, been around the world a few times.
Well, that sounds amazing, traveling all these different places. And I imagine it must be challenging and to pick up and move. And I want to talk a little bit. One of the things, having a father that was also in the military, I know a lot of times, uncertain times happen in the military, and you like you mentioned, you change locations, you change ranks, you change roles. You really have to pick up and start over, and sometimes uncertain times. So I want to talk a little bit about what advice you would give to civilian leaders about maintaining calm and focus when their path isn't really clear and they have to pick up and lift to maybe a different job or a different state. And just a little bit about your experiences as you've navigated across the globe.
I actually love that question. So you mentioned uncertainty and then changing ranks and then changing jobs, where's changing where you live. So to us, uncertainty and ambiguity comes with the territory. There's always a certain amount of information that you just can't know. As an example, as I get ready, as I'm looking for my new job or I'm waiting on the new assignment, I'm pretty comfortable, as are the people I work with just not knowing. And I say that because my wife will always want to know, hey, did you find out where we're going yet? Where we're going? And she wants to know. And I just know the answer. Not only is it going to come later than you want it, but it's never 100% that's where you're going. It could always change at the last minute. So you have to become comfortable with ambiguity, and you have to know when certainty is important, when you need certainty. So there are certain things, each rank comes with it's 4 or 5 years per pay grade per rank that you hold in the military. And then there's certain jobs that you must do. There are key developmental jobs that you must do in order to get promoted to the next rank. So understanding when and where you're going to perform those jobs, the uncertainty isn't great for that. You got to know, you've got to have a plan for that. And there's certain times when, you're in environments, Iraq, Afghanistan, when you're given an operation, there's just a certain amount of that operation that you just can't know. And there's certain parts that you really have to know. Where are we going? Why are we doing this? What exactly are we trying to accomplish here? The details along the way sometimes are just going to have to be ambiguous. What we do is we say, okay, this is a piece of information that I need to continue making my plan. I don't have that information, so I'm going to insert an assumption here. So between now and whatever that decision point is, I've got to look for details of information that help me confirm or deny that assumption. and that's a decision point that will tell me go either, left or right. So it's being comfortable in ambiguity, and it's knowing what facts do you actually need, and which ones can you just make assumptions for.
Yeah, and I love, I always say this to myself, worry is negative goal setting. I think there's thousands of assumptions one can make in any given situation, and the more you worry and focus on what could or might go wrong, it really takes you off your course and off your mission, and you can't really focus on the actual facts that you have. And facts, the way I think of facts, they're like a puzzle, right? The more facts you have, the better you can put your puzzle together.
That's right.
And worry just distracts you. It's like a blindfold as you're putting your puzzle together. And so a lot of times in uncertain times, I like to say to people, focus on the facts. And anytime you have a worry that comes into your mind, replace it with a fact, because you can't make really strategic business decisions in your type of situations or in regular civilian life without all the facts, right? And so, we live in a very rapidly evolving and changing world as far as technology and global events. And so I want to talk a little bit about, from your experience, how the military prepares leaders like you to be adaptable and flexible from going to Colorado to Africa. Very different environments, very different cultures, very different weather. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So again, be adaptable just comes with the territory. And I think in the military, because that is a prerequisite, if, especially the leader, the further you get in your career, if you aren't adaptable, at some point you're going to get weeded out. So people that can't adapt to new situations and environments won't function all that well. And I'll be honest, every organization I've been to does it differently, because I went from Colorado to Germany, huge difference. Um, so when you get to a new unit, there's things you're going to want to know. There's actually things you need to know. When you get to Germany, for example, the German government, because we are in Germany, though the German government is in charge of Germany. So when you get here, you have German rules you have to follow, and you also have U.S. rules you have to follow. So what people like to say is, for when you're in process and you have to go register your car, and you have to do a lot of things to make sure that you're, I guess, legal. You have status of forces agreement. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of bureaucracy you have to go through when you come to Germany as a U.S. military service member. And it's described as like the worst of German bureaucracy combined with the worst of U.S. bureaucracy. It's a lot of red tape, a lot of hassle. But back to the original question, what should happen? And like I said, every unit's different, so some units do this well, but you have to be cognizant of the fact that everybody that's coming to you, nearly everybody, is coming from somewhere else. So it's sort of incumbent on the unit that's there to help the new people adapt to, whatever the new things are. So if it's Germany, that's a huge adaptation. So what can we do as a unit for incoming personnel to ensure that they adapt, they understand, because German laws are different. You have to get a special driver's license here. There's different regulations on, the maintenance standards for your car. And if somebody doesn't help you understand all that, you're going to have a lot of problems. So it's really incumbent on the unit to understand that what the problem you just asked, and it's fairly ubiquitous throughout the Army that there's some process for that. It's not always employed with 100% efficiency, because somebody's actually got to be the one who takes the new person and helps them through that process. It's just another simple example. When you go to Fort Carson, where I just came from in Colorado, it's at 6,000 feet elevation. So running is much more challenging at Fort Carson than it is at sea level. So because of that, you're allotted a certain amount of time before you have to take your physical test, your fitness test. because it's going to take you longer to adapt. It's kind of a small sort of physical example, but it's an acknowledged fact that everybody has to go through an adjustment period. And if helped along that adjustment period, you'll adjust faster.
I love that. I think we got to give ourselves times to adjust, right? So any new situation, whether you're taking a new job or moving to a different country, there's time, like you said. Adjusting to the time zone, for example, seems
Yeah,
pretty
exactly.
easy, but if your body's used to sleeping, on Pacific Standard Time, and now you're, X hours ahead in other countries, it takes some time for your circadian rhythm to reset so you can sleep correctly. And so I love kind of what you said, adjusting, and really leaning into that and giving yourself time to work through that and let your body adjust to whatever the new challenge that you're in is.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the P4 leadership model and talk a little bit about the trust, excellence, embracing your purpose. Can you share a little bit about that with our listeners?
Happy to. Yeah. So the P4 is obviously 4 P. So people is the first P, partnerships is the second P, practice is the third, and purpose is the fourth. So the most basic, and it's kind of based on complexity theory, a little bit of neuroscience, a little bit of game theory, but the most basic thing you have to understand about building a team is the people. So that's why people is first. And then sort of the pinnacle of where you can get a team is that everyone has a very clear understanding of the team's purpose, which is why that's the last one. And just to kind of caveat it up front, not every team gets to that purpose domain, that echelon of team building, because it's very hard. It's if you think of like special forces organizations, they get there quicker because they have very rigid selection mechanism that sort of weeds out people until you get to a group of people who all kind of see the world the same way, who are all willing to sacrifice themselves because they believe in this thing that they tried really hard and seen their friends sort of fall by the wayside. They just put a lot of energy into getting into this organization. So they tend to see the world the same. They tend to share the same values already. So you kind of go through the first phases of P4 faster for that. But that's just an example. So in the real world, when you start with people, then if you're the new leader coming into an organization, you understand who am I leading. The first mechanism that you have to be aware of is trust. So trust is kind of the gateway criteria to get to the next one. So what does that really mean? So I have to exhibit behaviors as quickly as possible because I want to reach a threshold of trust to where I can say things and they believe that my motivations are benign and that my interests revolve around making the team better and making them better as individuals. And that sounds simple, but if you're, for example, if you're an introvert, then you won't be compelled to communicate that often. So what happens is people fill the gap in you not talking with their own assumptions about why you're not talking, first of all, and then they just have to try to use the very minuscule cues that you're giving them to understand you. So I'm kind of an introvert myself. So I know I have to go out of my way to communicate, to talk, to let people know that I want the organization to succeed. And that's where my interests lie. So when you ask them to do something hard or uncomfortable, their immediate thought is, I don't want to do that. I don't think this guy knows what he's doing. Their immediate thought should be, it's probably okay. I trust him. He knows what's best for the unit. I'll do the uncomfortable thing. So to me, that's like the most basic line between the two dots that are people in your organization. Next is
Yeah.
partnership. So go ahead.
No,
I
no,
could
no,
talk
no.
about
Sorry.
this for a long time.
Keep
So if
going.
you want to chat,
Yeah. No, I think I was just going to say that like you were saying about trust, I think, I'm in the casino gaming industry, and I think a trust like a slot machine, you got to put a whole bunch of coins in that machine until you can take your prize, right? And I think a lot of times people assume very quickly that they have the trust and that people trust them, and it's easy to break it down too. Like you could spend 10 years
That's
building
right.
trust, and it takes one situation to lose the trust. And so I think a lot of times trust is not given, it's earned. And the only way you can earn trust is, like you were saying, is to communicate and to talk. And if you're not talking, it's very hard to build trust with body language. And, um, so I think that's so spot on.
Yeah. And, but I imagine it's this way with every organization, but in the military, part of the implicit trust comes with the rank you wear. So I tend to just have this baseline trust for someone who outranks me because I make assumptions about what they know. Got this far. So there is a little bit of implicit trust, but a lot of it is earned. A lot of it's almost impossible to gain through nonverbals and body language and people just making assumptions about you. And you can't. It does take a long time to build. And I used to explain it this way: is like when I'm asking leaders that work for me, like, what are you doing to build trust? And have to explain that it's literally the aggregate of all your behaviors that add up to trust or not, because you can't just go to your team and say, okay, team, trust me. I want you to trust me. Does everybody trust me now? Just doesn't work like that. It's an indirect mechanism. And I can move on to partnerships if you're ready.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So because I needed a model that had all the same starting letters, partnerships, what I really mean is teams, right? So the milestone criteria for teams is cohesion. So you have the two dots that are people with the link between them that's trust. Now you aggregate dots and you put more lines. And what you want is team cohesion. And what I mean by that is not only do I trust the people I work with, that then I have this baseline, this threshold level of trust. What we also have is sort of we're beginning to congeal this unit identity, i.e., I see my own identity, but I also have this unit identity. We're the barracudas or lions or whatever we are. My brain and I'll start to adjust to say, okay, identify with this team. Like these are my people. This is kind of like a family. And you'll start to put a little more energy into making the team better at your own discomfort because you feel a special bond to these people. Family is a good kind of, I guess, metaphor for it, but you sort of cross this boundary where now this team that that you were new to at some point and you didn't know anybody. Now you know people. Now you know about their families. You can say, "Oh, that's Joe. Joe's really good at this. If we need this, then we'll go to Joe and he'll do it." Then you get things like, because you want the team to succeed. Hey, Joe didn't show up today. Hey, we got to pull that a little extra weight, do Joe's job. And nobody's really upset about that. Yeah, no big deal. Joe would do it for us. We'll just fill it in, right? So at this level, generally, and of course, these things don't always perfectly apply, but you can think of the transition from a very basic team to a really efficient team. At some point, the team has a very hierarchical leadership structure in which the leaders at the top, people at the bottom can be good, but they're always looking up for someone to kind of give them direction. And this is where it sort of transitions at that partnership stage is I'll go from a hierarchical leadership to, you know what, I've been doing this. I know how to do this. I want the team to succeed. If I go ask the boss, he's going to tell me to do this. I know this is what we do on Wednesdays. I'm just going to do it anyway without asking. And then people sort of build this, this initiation mechanism that lets them just do what you're supposed to do without being told. And that's a huge threshold right there. And that's purpose. I'm sorry, that's partnerships.
Yeah, I think it is. It's an interesting. I love the piece. First of all, that's great. I do think when I think of a cohesive working team, sometimes one of your teammates are going to be down and the sum total of the group needs to pick up when, let's say, somebody's sick, right? And you have a mission to get done. Or so I think when there's trust in a team and one person is not on their A game, the other team members pick up the slack. And I see this in sports. I see this in the military, in corporate America. But if you don't have the trust in the team, it's highly unlikely, people are going to want to, stay late to do extra work if, you're not well liked and you're not well trusted in that group. So you're spot on. It requires a lot of trust, communication, collaboration, understanding the vision and the purpose and why we're all here doing this together. And so I think those are great. Um, Great. Any final thoughts on that before I switch gears on you?
No, yeah, let's switch gears.
I want to talk a little bit about making decisions. I think in the military, it's like a muscle. You're able to make quick decisions and you don't think about it. It's gut reaction. You do it right away without thinking. And in corporate America, I think a lot of times we do a lot of humming and thinking and processing and going back to the drawing board. And sometimes decisions might take years in corporate America, which effectively slows the business down from, like you were saying, their purpose. So I want to talk a little bit about how you can balance these quick decision making with fear of not making the right one, but still making sure that you're making the best decision for that time.
Yeah, that's a huge topic. So decision making in the military. So there's a couple ways this happens, and it's not necessarily quick. It depends on what the decision is, because I know there are times when I'm gonna yell at you, do this right now. It's a high stress environment, and you have to do it. And I have to think through, what is the decision? Somebody's got to do it. Go do it. For the most part, every service is different, but in the Army, we have a structure, a sort of framework called the military decision making process. And it's very rigid, very structured. First, understand all the variables that go along with this problem. That's where things like assumptions come in. Do I have all the facts I need to conduct this operation? And essentially, the way I describe the military decision making process is, if you can put out a theoretical dry erase board, here's all the facts that I would need to know in order to fully execute this mission. Some of those you do know, so you can kind of mark those off. Some of them you don't. If I don't know this, do I really need to know it? And if I really need to know it, then it becomes an assumption that I have to verify along the way before we execute, hopefully. And then you can build a plan, and you can say, okay, here was a big conceptual problem that we wanted to solve, and the why. And here are the much smaller, more well-defined, less complicated problems that comprise that big problem. What you essentially do is you take this big ambiguous problem, like move 300 vehicles and 1,200 people from Texas to California to conduct a big training rotation. You essentially whittle those problems down into command level problems at the very junior level. Okay, commander, figure out how to get your people from your headquarters to this bus with this gear. And it even goes lower than that. Okay, squad leader, I need you to take your 7 people, inspect their gear, make sure they have all their stuff, make sure it's serviceable, and get to this point at this time and get on the bus. So there's different ways to look at decision making. That is the most deliberate, most sort of step action drill of decision making. But there are other times, like you said, when a decision needs to be made right now. So it's one of those things where hopefully you have enough experience and context to not just be at a decision point and have to make a decision in the absence of any other data. Usually what's going on is you're in a situation, usually stressful. It's got to be a quick decision. In the environment you're in, you're constantly watching for data. And as a commander, what you should be thinking about, as a leader in general, but that's what commanders really do, is you're always thinking, what could happen? What's next? Where am I accepting risk? What's the worst thing that could happen right now? What would I have to do if that thing happens? And then, and you're always thinking, what decisions might I have to make? In fact, you might say, hey, look, the worst thing that can happen in this operation is something that's catastrophic. So before we go out, let's figure out what can we do to mitigate that risk? Because it might be something on a road. Okay, can we avoid that road? That way, that decision point is just eliminated. But it's kind of things like that. So it's not the absence of data, because you're constantly scanning for data. It's the ability to keep that data in front of your mind, so that if there's a decision point, it's going to need to be quick. You can make it with as much data as you had access to at the time. And one of the things they kind of beat into us is an 80% solution right now is much better than a 100% solution that's too late. So, and that always made sense to me.
I love that. And I think the military really does help train leaders to make decisions. I think, going back to your example in the military, if your leader yells at you to do whatever the thing is, you do it. You don't overthink it. You do it, right? He's your leader or she's your leader. In corporate America, if your leader yells at you to get something done, we get into the emotions a lot with things, or overthinking it, or in not just doing it, right? Because really, like you were saying at the beginning, the leader is made its way up to the CEO or whatever the rank is in the military, and they're the decision makers for whatever the mission is, whether it's military or corporate America. So I do like that saying about 80%, because kind of going back to what I said before, I see people hem and haw over decisions all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes it's just picking and going with the best decision with 80% of the information. So I want to transition and talk a little bit about leadership principles and, from the military's point of view, how do you think that those principles that you mentioned, some of them, any others, how they translate into civilian world, and how you think they will transition for you?
Yeah, well, they're kind of ubiquitous. So they translate into everything. And I'm writing a book right now that starts with those and sort of drives down into some of the details, throws a couple other leadership models on top of them, and then kind of spits out the P4 model. And I spent some time when I was in the war college. Leadership's always been my passion, so I wanted to understand, leadership doctrine in general. Where does this come from? How well are we applying it? What does the Army really say we're supposed to do? And the interesting thing is, if you take the Army, get to the Army principles here in a minute, but you can imagine there's a ton of Army leadership doctrine. Like it's a leadership factory. We prioritize leadership. We want to train people in leadership. The funny thing is, we don't really train specific leadership skills until the much higher, like not till you've been in the Army for probably 15 years do you go to school that just kind of gives you leadership paradigms and talks through the intricacies of leadership writ large. You're just expected to go read the field manual that talks about leadership and apply it from knowledge from the book, which I always found was interesting, because leadership is one of the backbones of what we do. And in my opinion, if you can learn how to be a good leader, you can fit all the other stuff in there, because you're really good at getting people to do what's supposed to be done without putting up too much of a fight. So there's a couple of things, right? So a vast amount of leadership doctrine that's not really trained in any of the Army schools, a little bit, but not too much less than you'd expect. And then you have things like, well, okay, if we're not going to put it in the schools, then the assumption is they're going to get, when they go to organizations and at the junior ranks, an organization will be responsible for training very young officers, lieutenants on lieutenant level tasks, and they'll be responsible for training young commanders, company commanders, captains on specific skills for that rank, and on, which does happen. The problem is, because it's not formalized at the Army level, it is actually somewhat, it's just not enforced from the Army level down to the unit level. So what happens is you get different versions of that everywhere you go. So you get some versions where none of that happens. And you get some versions of, someone who really cares about leaders and understands how to train and convey information and get people to interact and stuff like that. It happens very well, but it's not standard. So it depends on the organization you go to. And you've seen the P4, like, I'm so interested in it, I built my own model that's derivative from the Army model. But there's just a lot of ways to do it. Now, what the Army uses is what's called the Army Leadership Requirements Model. So these are roughly the principles, and it's broken into sort of 6 facets. And there's 3 on top, there's 3 on bottom. And the 3 on top are called attributes, and the 3 on the bottom are called competencies. So the 3 attributes are things like character, presence, intellect. So these are the things a leader should be and know. So what we expect of leaders is that you have strong character, that you're not going to break the laws or break the rules or demean people. We want people to have strong intellect, so the ability to solve problems, to understand sort of human-related problems as well as tactical-related problems. And so I already forgot character, intellect, and presence. So presence is the third one. So we expect you to look and behave like a leader, i.e. you don't show up to work looking sloppy, you enforce standards, you stay fit, things like that. Now, the competencies are the things you should do. So that's things like, just a simple category, it's called leads, right? There's another one that's called develops others. And there's a third one called, we'll get back to that one in a minute because I forgot that one too. So let's talk about leads. So leads is the simple competency of getting people to do the things that you need them to do, right? Which I would say at the junior level sounds like, I know what to do. I say, do these things, and people will do the things. But the longer you stay in the military, the more you realize, well, it's certainly not that simple. So along the way, you go from transactional leadership to, it would just be easier if they knew all the things and they were willing to do the things without me even telling them. So you learn leadership techniques that evolve from, you do this and then they do it, to here's the plan, here's where we want to go as an organization, here's the behaviors I expect, here's the mission, here's the intent, here's why we exist. And then you want your subordinate leaders to do that kind of stuff, right? So the next one is develops. And interestingly, develops is the one we do these surveys every couple of years. Develops others is actually one where most Army, in the aggregate, Army leaders score the lowest. In other words, this is of those 6 attributes and competencies that I'm explaining, develops others is the one that's always rated the lowest, meaning that what the respondent said was that develops others is not very high on their organization's priority list. And remember, this develops others is part of how you build leaders, because we don't do it in the schools. Organizations have to do this, but it's done very poorly, which is an interesting contrast. So it's very high, it's very low on the organization's priority list. I mean, it's not being done all that well. And it's also not being done all that effectively. And it's not consistent across units. Some you'll get a lot, some you'll get literally zero. So that's a big one. And that's, to me, that's the most important one. That's where I love, especially once I was a battalion commander and a brigade commander, I really love spending time helping people wade through the complexities of what leadership is and explaining, basically telling them everything I know about it. I just have fun doing that. And then the third one is kind of the catch-all called achieves. So and you got to be careful with that one. And I'll explain why in a minute. But achieves, the simple bumper sticker for that one is gets results. The problem with that is I can violate all the other 5 attributes and competencies to get results, but then it doesn't matter, right? Because I basically destroyed my team. So yeah, I got results. I did the achieve, but now everybody hates the Army and doesn't want to stay in the Army because of how I treated them, because all my plans were terrible. And so anyway, if I was going to boil down leadership principles, it's those attributes and competencies.
Yeah, and I think kind of what you were saying, leading people and developing people are here's the mission, do the thing, and developing people to have the same skill sets is a tricky in corporate America, right? I think right now, for fear of there's not enough for everyone mentality, like there can only be one of this rank, so I can't train someone less ranked because I don't want them to take my job, right? So I think a lot of times, like, you can't move up until you help somebody move behind you, right? And in some other industries, I think in like multi-level marketing, they say, I don't make a dime until you make a dollar. And that is really, correlates back to leadership too, right? You to build and develop people, it takes time. And just like you develop your children, right? Your kids don't, they're not born and they don't take care of themselves. They need to be developed and coached, and they make mistakes, and you put them back on the yellow brick road and you teach them again. And I'll correlate it also to parenting. Like, you want your kid to make a ton of mistakes while they're in your home, because when they go out in the world and they have to make mistakes, if they don't make them with you, they're not going to understand in the world how to resolve them. And it's the same thing with leadership, right? You want, before people are leading people, you need them to make some of the mistakes with you to learn right from wrong and how to do things the way, that the military wants it to be done. And I think, you know, talking a little bit about the future of leadership, I think leadership is changing a ton right now. And what is a leader? Because a leader isn't just by rank and by title. A leader can be someone without a title, without a rank, that needs to step up in an uncertain situation and do things because maybe the leader's not present, or something happened to the leader, or they're not available to do what the mission is. Those people need to step up. And kind of like you were saying at the beginning, like, that takes grit, determination, understanding the mission, and being all in, right? And it correlates in all different industries. So I want to get a little bit of your thoughts and your experience as it relates to, resiliency too. And how do you cultivate resiliencies and leadership when you're building your teams?
Yeah. So resilience kind of comes with the territory. And again, it's, this is keep retreading this same ground, but there's a certain amount of resiliency required just based on the uncertainty of the military, that if you're not, if you don't have a certain level of resiliency, the Army's not going to be for you, because it just comes with the territory. So artificial sort of filtering mechanism there, but resiliency is important. So there's a lot of things that can happen to you or around you in the military that are emotionally traumatic or very stressful, that require you to be able to have fortitude to kind of process, however long that takes, but process and then get back to what you have to do. So it's sort of a built-in mechanism. I'll even point out that resilience was one of our taglines for what we were sort of in the heart of the Iraq, global war on terrorism, because service members were coming back and having emotional problems, and we're having a hard time. We didn't have the structure, the institutional knowledge to process that. Now we do, but there was a time when having social, people who could give care and have psychologists to help folks. It was there. It wasn't robust enough to service the needs of the service members coming back. So that got added to the military's sort of institutional structure, and we started enforcing on commanders to build resilience. And now we've got things like we've got classes that units do. There's actually a position in a lot of units now. It's called a master resiliency trainer. And I always love one of the modules they do. This is like a 40-hour block of instruction on how to be resilient. And one of the first blocks they do is simply titled "How to Hunt the Good Stuff." So it just simply teaches you to understand your circumstances, see what's going on, and understand that maybe you're interpreting it as bad, maybe not, but you really need to understand what's going on. And somewhere in there is something that's good that you can reinforce, right? And the Army is a hard lifestyle. In a lot of cases, I'm sort of suited for it, and I'm institutionalized at this point, so I'm okay. But I know, especially for folks transitioning, especially young folks transitioning from the civilian world to the military, it's a huge culture change. And so that comes with a lot of pressures, a lot of stress, a lot of uncertainty. So it is incumbent on people like me, more senior folks, to understand and try to do this, but to understand that, anytime you go to a new organization, just being the new person in an organization is stressful, especially when you're young, even compounded more when this is your first unit ever, right? So much uncertainty, so much of I don't know. You don't know the people. You have no signs of safety, and that's really what you're looking for when you're stressed, right? I'm looking for something stable, indications or signatures of safety that I can sort of latch on to. So it's a big deal when people are new. I've always tried to do this, but when people are new, you have to go out of your way to make them feel comfortable, because that's really literally the first day. That's sort of the signal. Are you building trust by helping them feel safe in this new environment, or are you're going to play the game of, oh, you're the new guy, I was stressed, now you're going to be stressed, let's make it more stressful for you as sort of a test, or even worse, you're the new guy and I'm indifferent, I don't care, so just figure it out like everybody else did. So I think that's real important for units too. I think it's important for senior leaders to understand that I can make that guy more valuable to the team. I can make him or her want to be on this team more, simply by doing a few behaviors to indicate this is a safe place. We're going to take care of you. You're part of the family.
Yeah, and first impressions are everything. And how you
Yeah.
leave people feeling is everything, because that is how they're going to leave feeling is how they think of you, right? And if you're making a first bad impression and you're angry and you're aggressive and you're yelling, that's not going to be the great first impression. So like you said, you got to go out of your way to make it right for them, to get them in the right mindset to move them forward with the mission. And I love kind of what you were saying. I think it's spot on. And the other thing is discipline. I think resilience and discipline, I kind of see them hand in hand, right? So when people come back from these really challenging missions, they need to have the discipline to take care of themselves, to process it, to work through it, just like staying in shape, right? Because a lot of times I think the more we bottle things and say, okay, I'm going to bottle that, I'm going to put it in a file folder on the back of my head. Before long, the file folder gets full of stuff that we haven't had the discipline to process and work through, that it just spills out into your life. And so I love kind of what you were saying, but I think, just kind of in closing, just final kind of closing thoughts and takeaways, or anything, any key lessons that we maybe haven't talked about, or thoughts you want to leave with our listeners before we close up.
So, because leadership is my passion, I see the world through the lens of basically all the stuff we've already talked about. So I'm real cognizant of how a leader makes people feel. And you mentioned at one point that maybe it's not the leader who's making the decision; it's someone who's in the right position at the right time that has to do leadership things. I think that's very true, because it's not just the person that wears the highest rank that has to be the leader. I think everybody has to be able to understand when the environment calls for them to be a leader, and to be ready for that, and scanning the environment to understand, is this the time where I need to do a leadership thing? Nobody's called me a leader, but the environment is indicating that I need to do this thing. I can do something simple as make someone feel comfortable in this environment, you know, help them understand what it is that we're supposed to be doing, and just led that person. So for me, it's just not just a corporate or executive or military leadership thing. It's a framework to see the world around you and to understand how you're interacting with the people, the most basic unit in the social system around you, interacting with the people, and either making them more comfortable in the environment or helping them do something that makes them better.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Oh, I have to unpack that. I think you could be a fantastic leader. You can be the world's greatest leader. But if your culture and your environment isn't set up for success and it's toxic, it can be hard to lead in those kind of environments and getting everybody in the mission, right? So, like the principles you were mentioning, if you achieve the mission, but nobody trusts you, you've taken things, you've not been, I would say the right leader, is it really all worth it, right? I
Mhm.
think I hear a lot in corporate America, um, my culture is toxic, therefore I can't do what I need to do or lead the people the way I need to lead. And it becomes tricky, right? And I think I love all that you just said, because I think to be a really great leader, you have to have the support and the vision and clearly understand the mission that you're going for, because it gets everybody going and pulling on the rope together versus against each other on opposite ends of the rope.
Yeah, if you've created an environment and you're the one who's technically in charge, but you have a toxic environment and nobody will go out of their way to do the right thing unless you force them to, you're not the leader. Somebody else is, but it's not you. You're the person that owns the reins, and you can tell people which direction to go, and they might do it, but you're not the leader. The leader's driving the organization. It is somewhere else in your organization, but it's not you.
Yes, that is so good. I really agree. Damon, thank you so much for being here
It's
and
my pleasure.
sharing your insights. I cannot wait to read your book. I'm excited to hear all about the principles that we've talked today about. Follow Damon, read his book. We'll share all the details in the show notes, and follow us. That's the Executive Connect podcast.